If you're anything like me, then A, God help you, and B, you find yourself hated by both the left and the right. They just use different words. So before they can label you, label yourself a problematic degenerate. Available at Teespring, Postmortem-Studios, with plenty of other designs too. There isn't really a word for what I am politically. Anarcho-pragmatist, maybe? I have my ideals, I know how I would like the world to work, I know how I would like it to be organised, but at the same time I recognise that without some severe changes to human nature and the world at large, I'm simply not going to get what I want. So I settle for the means and the ideologies that are available, the systems that are available that can get me closer to that goal. So while I'm ideologically an anarchist, pragmatically I'm a socialist, because that would seem to provide for the greatest freedom and the greatest opportunity for the greatest number of people. But because I profess myself as an anarchist, because that's my ideal, anarcho-capitalists and LOLbertarians seem to think that somehow puts me on their side. Much like Treebeard in The Lord of the Rings, I'm not altogether on anybody's side because nobody is altogether on my side. It doesn't make me a filthy centrist, because my political beliefs are well to the left and well to the libertarian, small l, libertarian. But there are underlying problems that I can see with the overarching ideology of both the left and the right. The left tends to see the best in people, and ideologically most leftist systems believe that if you remove structures of oppression, if you remove the context in which people live that forces them to be selfish and unaltruistic and all of these negative things, that those will fade away somehow. The right tends to view everybody as being a selfish, amoral, nasty person, and on the one hand they indulge this in their policies, they even encourage it in a lot of them, and on the other hand they seek very, very strict laws and enforcements in order to force people to behave in some way. The left does the same thing but on a more social structure, and can tend to be too forgiving in the extreme, what they call pathological altruism. So you've got one side that will indulge psychopaths, believing that nothing can be done about them, and the other side that will indulge them, believing that they can be cured. Both of these approaches, well, they don't work. We can see, you just need to open the window and look out at the world to see the effects that both ideologies have had. It is better to be forgiving. The left has historically had the right of it, pun intended, but there are still problems with both points of view. The fatal flaw in pretty much any political system comes about through the over-concentration of power within the hands of any single particular group. Now, Western democracies tend to try and balance this kind of issue. So certain powers will be invested in the executive, certain powers will be invested in the judiciary, and so on. You know, America is an example of this, from its constitution, from its intent from the get-go. But most modern democracies have a similar way of balancing things. But this is balancing within government. We do see in other nations when too much power is invested in the executive, or the president, or the monarch, or the parliament, or any other particular group. When things are thrown out of whack, you start to have major problems. One of the deep flaws in Marxism, that gets confused with socialism, is that by bringing everything under the purview of the party chairman, all the rest of it, which is supposed to then transition to a stateless society. But when you bring everything, all power, all control, everything into the hands of a handful of people, perhaps even one person, it always seems to go off the rails. The state never withers away. Instead, all power becomes concentrated in the hands of a corrupt few. And this isn't limited to a problem with Marxism. This is also a problem with ardent laissez-faire capitalism. Power, in the form of money, concentrates in the hands of a very few, and so distorts the entire process. When it costs millions or billions to become president, it is out of the reach of the vast and overwhelming majority of people. When running for even lesser offices is ruinously expensive, you have to solicit donations. Where do those donations and things come from? Companies and vastly wealthy individuals who then distort and bend our politics to serve the interests of business, not the people. Some people get these confused, Ancaps and LOLbertarians amongst them. So what do we have that acts as a counterbalance to this power that's invested in capital? I mean, power is the perfect word to use because money is like energy. If you have money, you can use it to get things done, just like energy has to be used to get things done. Yeah, it's a damn near perfect analogy. Well, in an ideal world, the counterbalance to the power of capital is the power of the populace, the people, via their government. So in an ideal world, the state is really the only form of power that we have that can counterbalance the power of private capital. And the state is supposed to be responsive to the people, as well as being able to remove from them. It's a kind of combination of technocracy and mob rule that's always seeking a point of balance of its own. But the point is that the state is powerful enough via our consent to regulate and control capital. And we see what happens when regulation is removed. Capital tends to get out of control. We slip into the boom and bust cycles. Again, things go horribly wrong. The Great Recession is a result of removing a lot of restrictions and controls over finance. So when you don't have that balance, things rapidly go awry, and because companies have no real single point of responsibility, and because they're engines for making money, profit is almost always their singular highest goal. And so they act like rampaging psychopaths, and they do harm through inaction or corruption to the people around them. Now, LOLbertarians and Ancaps want to remove any and all counterbalances to capital without replacing the system of capital with anything else, like, say, voluntarism, which is where a more classic left-wing anarchist position would be, such as anarcho-syndicalism, where people just freely exchange and there's no need for capital and the power and distortion that capital brings. But the Ancaps and LOLbertarians, they want to minimise or remove entirely all counterbalances and controls on business. Now, this historically has been absolutely disastrous. Now, you might point to the non-aggression policy, but that only prevents direct violence towards others. Otherwise, you're going to have to open that out massively, and then you end up basically where we are now, only more messy. Because if you start regarding offence and similar things as violations of the non-aggression policy, well, you're going to end up with a less free society, not a more free society. And if you don't have counterbalances and controls to capital, if you don't have a way of breaking up monopolies, if you don't have a way of enforcing rules upon them, you're just eventually going to end up with one enormous and unassailable authority in the form of a mass of capital that is incapable of being questioned or removed at all. Now, this is often a criticism of other forms of anarchism, and it's one that I agree with. How do you prevent someone becoming a dictator, becoming forceful? Just because you subscribe to the Non-Aggression Pact or you believe in voluntarism doesn't mean that the next guy over isn't a psychopath who will kill you and take your stuff at the drop of a hat. We're all idealists. to some degree or another. We've all always thought, oh, wouldn't it be nice if? But you have to temper that with pragmatism. We live in the real world. My ideals don't mean that I'm prepared to ignore the flaws or the problems with those ideals or the world in which we live. And I'm sorry, Ancaps and Libertarians, you're just never going to convince me that indulging, exacerbating and encouraging the very worst parts of human nature is in any way going to make the world even slightly better. Ideals are fantastic as something to aim for, as something to guide us, but you have to temper it with reality. Zang.
Today. See, I don't like the, I have, okay, like a lot of you, I hate a lot, you know? But I hate with style and creativity. Yeah!